Hey now, Adam.
What's up, Sitch?
So we're gonna watch a video. This is on your favorite topic, okay? Cultural Christianity.
Cultural Christianity. Well, you do know that I am an atheist for Jesus.
There you go. And so this is an interesting video. Richard Dawkins, very famous atheist, okay? Very famous anti-theist. I don't know. Is he? Seems like he's changed his mind on Christianity. He's very anti-Islam, but wants the cultural aspects of his country in the UK and the Christian influences to remain. So that's
Wow. I mean,
an interesting thing.
I thought that was all delusion.
I don't know. We'll see. And then also, Crystal and Sagar debate about this. Crystal seems to not be very happy with Richard Dawkins' take on all this.
Well, she looks depressed in the video here, so
She does.
let's see what happens. Oh, she looks happy now.
There you go. There you go.
Must have been the screen pause.
It was.
Dawkins, who some of you may know, probably one of the most famous atheists in the entire world, gave a very interesting interview to the LBC, the London Broadcasting Corporation, which has caused a lot of discussion about atheism, cultural Christianity, Islamophobia, and more. Let's take a listen to what Mr. Dawkins had to say.
Church attendance is plummeting, but the erection of mosques across Europe, I think 6,000 are under construction, and there are many more, are being planned. So do you regard that as a problem? Do you think that matters?
Yes, I do, really. I mean, I don't, I have to choose my words carefully. I mean, if I had to choose between Christianity and Islam, I choose Christianity every single time. I mean, it seems to me to be a fundamentally decent religion in a way that I think Islam is not.
I think you're going to have to explain why you say that, Professor Dawkins. Why is...
I think you're going to have to explain why you're not a bigot. How dare you say those words in that order? Ooh.
Yeah, no. The left has really adopted moral relativism. They're like, your religion, is your religion. It's your jam, You like cannibalism? Okay, go for it. Go for it, right? Female genital mutilation. You just do you, boo.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Right.
Yeah. You forgiveness is nowhere to be found in your religion. You want revenge? Oh yeah, jump on that. No. We need to stop this cultural relativism stuff.
I think there's a way to phrase this that Dawkins doesn't, and I'll talk about once Crystal and Saul get into it, that would, I think, show people what you're trying to say without delving specifically into the theological considerations between Christianity and Islam. Because I'm assuming most people don't I don't know what the deep theological arguments are that are opposed by Islam, and I imagine most people that are not Islamic don't either. So that's not really what people are reacting to when they hear these, conversations.
Look, and I think you can use theology to endorse any sort of behaviors. There's really that much leeway in these texts. So you really got to look at what sort of culture is being produced by these texts at the particular moment, right?
Right.
Because there is, there's the Old Testament, an eye for an eye, which is about revenge, obviously, right?
Well,
and then there's the New Testament that is about turn the other cheek and
it actually
forgive
wasn't
and move
about
on.
revenge.
Okay.
It was about limiting.
After you said, I don't know anything about the theology. Well, actually,
I said the Quran. I don't know anything about Quran. I say,
okay.
I know about the Old Testament. No,
I guess that is. That's the Jewish book. Yeah, okay, never mind. Go ahead.
The concept of eye for an eye, though obviously it's interesting in modern interpretations, it's almost always used as like a revenge sort of thing. So I understand why it's thought of that way. My understanding originally was that when that was prescribed, thousands of years ago, that was supposed to be the limiting factor for the amount of justice that could be enacted because people were so crazy. It's like, you did something to me, well, I'm going to wipe out your whole family, right? And they're like, no. You got eye for an eye. It's got to be like, the same level of justice or revenge, right?
So as baby steps towards forgiveness. That's
Yes.
interesting. That is interesting. Yeah, because that's my feeling. Look, you scratch my car. It's like, look, I'm going to genocide your people.
Right. Right. No, like, no. You could scratch his car back. Okay. Don't kill his whole family. Right.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I get it. That's interesting. So thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too when thinking about it. Like, if they remember that the Old Testament was written like 2, maybe 3, 4,000 years, before the New Testament.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Islam
way
fundamentally not decent like Christianity.
Yes, I mean
Oh, did you see that heavy sigh the interviewer had too? Oh, this is juicy. This is juicy, Sitch.
right.
the way women are treated. I mean, Christianity is not great about that. It's had its problems with female vicars and female bishops and things, but there's an active hostility to women, which is promoted, I think, by the holy books of Islam. I'm not talking about individual Muslims, who, of course, are quite different, but the doctrines of Islam, the Hadith and the Quran, is fundamentally hostile to women, hostile to gays, and I find that I like to live in a culturally Christian country, although I do not believe a single word of the Christian faith.
Okay, so that last part, that is what set the internet on fire. What was interesting is that because we live in parallel universes, on my timeline, I follow, this is on Twitter, okay, it's just to reveal my own bias. I follow a lot of right-wing Christians in particular, just to keep my tabs on like what exactly is going on. And a lot of them were attacking Dawkins. They're like, oh, he tore down Christianity and he advocated for secularism, and now he's coming back and calling himself a cultural Christian. And I'll just say this, like, I've followed Richard Dawkins for a long time. It was a personal inspiration. I had my cringe atheist phase like anybody else who was a young man on YouTube, had copies of The God Delusion, and gave them out to people. I read every book that the man...
Holy moly, that's cringe. Really? Why would you admit that, Sagar? You bought extra copies of The God Delusion to give to your friends?
That's pretty, he was that guy.
That's far and above your atheist cringe phase.
That's
your cringe atheist phase.
Hey, do you believe in God? Here's a book that you should read. Which, by the way, I've read The God Delusion. I mean, yeah, like, it's not persuasive. Like, if you believe in God.
Really? Oh, wow.
I don't
Interesting.
think so. Do you think it's persuasive?
Yeah, I think it's pretty persuasive.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't
definitely.
think it's that persuasive.
Look, I might have liked some Thunderfoot videos back in the day, but I wasn't giving out copies of The God Delusion at Christmas time. Come on, Sagar.
Man has literally ever written, at least I stopped 10 years ago. I don't know if he's written anything
His
since.
pop science books too before God.
Yeah, they were great.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, I think it's controversial. I think he created the word memetic, like the word meme, which eventually became meme online.
That is 100% true, but it's from the selfish gene, not from the God Delusion. So
Yeah, no, I think he says that. Let me just say, I said so I just looked it up. Officially, the Old Testament was believed to be written 1,000 years, 1,200 years before the New Testament. Though they think that a lot of the stories were compiled and kind of passed around for even up to 1,000 years before that. So it's 1,000 years, not 2 to 4. Totally wrong about that.
All right.
Anyway,
fact checking along the way.
Fact checking myself. That's fine. Good.
Again, controversial in terms of the
attribution.
Yeah, the attribution of the term. Let's return to this. The reason I was annoyed by that is because having read and listened to a lot of Dawkins, even attended one of his lectures, we could put this up there here on the screen, which I went back and found, is he's been calling himself a cultural Christian here for quite a long time. And why I was annoyed in terms of the Christian reaction.
So there you go. This is from 2007.
Yeah, that's way back.
Which is interesting because I'm not, in this right-wing circle that Sagar's talking about. I'm someone who read The God Delusion. I mean, I obviously don't remember every word of it. It was a while ago. But my impression of Dawkins was always an anti-theist. I never was familiar with him making this argument that he's a cultural Christian.
Yeah, neither I. I've never heard this, but...
So it's interesting that, I was never, I guess, the biggest fanboy of Sagar's, but I would definitely say that I think his public persona was not cultural Christian whatsoever in terms of what he was really, how the average person would view him would not view him through the cultural Christian lens. I mean, even how that South Park episode where he was going around like crapping on people's, religion and attacking them. So,
Yeah.
and had sex with Mr. Garrison, and it was very gross.
He was tearing down Christianity from my perspective. So
Right.
yeah.
To Dawkins is that Dawkins has always said that he ascribes, as he points out here, a celebration of Judeo-Christian type values, but not in the actual text of the Bible and of the religion of Christianity himself. Egalitarianism, equality, just the general the general respect of English common law, which of course, even atheists and secular people like me can acknowledge comes from a Christian tradition. That's what he meant by the term. So anyway, for me, watching a lot of the Christian right attack Dawkins as somehow being hypocritical. I mean, frankly, he's been saying stuff like this for 20-some, probably before I was even born. But at least in my adult lifetime, nothing that he said was new. Anyway, I'm curious for what you think.
So the reaction from the left, I mean, there was a little bit of commentary on the cultural Christian thing because I understand why people are like, your whole thing is being an atheist, but now you're like, well, no, actually, this is my tribe. There is something about that you're like, all right, dude, like you're just making a full right turn now. But the part that I saw more reaction to, and which I personally reacted more to, were the comments about Islam, which again, are actually not new.
They're not new at all.
From Dawkins, who has been smearing Islam and by extension, all followers of that faith for quite a while. And, I personally think it's outrageous. And actually,
it's so ironic here because a lot of the reason why people on the left hate Christianity is because they perceive it as homophobic.
Right.
Which is more homophobic, Christianity or Islam? Just a gut check, Sitch. Which one is more homophobic?
I'm gonna say Islam.
Yeah. This is such a massive contradiction. It's such. I don't know why they don't get cognitive dissonance every time this comes up. It's like
because of the oppression hierarchy.
So when Dawkins comes out and says, look, I'm a cultural Christian, what people on the left hear is, I'm a homophobic bigot. That's what they hear. But then they rush into Sim for Islam like, oh, I don't see any homophobia here. Brown people can't be homophobic.
It's
so silly.
You bring up a fantastic point, and it's a very interesting point. Because if you were to go around the people on the left who identified as atheists or very anti-Christian, you say, like, why do you not like Christianity? They would say, oh, I don't like Christianity because it's anti-gay, it's anti-trans, it's too conservative, politically leaning. They go through like the whole gambit of all these Republican-y beliefs that they don't like, that they associate with Christianity. And it's like, okay, you understand all those same beliefs exist stronger in the religion of Islam.
Yeah. Times that by 10. Yes.
Right. That would be a great thing for someone to do, to go around and ask, go to like some left-wing political rally and ask them like, how do you feel about Christianity? And they say, oh, I don't like it. You say, why don't you like it? And they kind of rattle off things, say, how do you feel about Islam?
Right. And then the silence.
Right. You just, the cognitive, like they realize the trap has been sprung. They're like, oh no, wait a minute. What am I doing? Nah!
Yeah, exactly. But just interesting, a little tidbit there.
Yeah, but
to me, if you're serious,
Christians are white people, Adam, and Islamic people are brown, and they're oppressed.
I know. That's exactly what's going on.
It's intellectual, and you know that you consider yourself a cultural Christian, whatever that actually means. You should interrogate your own potential bias towards this ecosystem that you grew up in, and the belief system that has been sort of like humanized and made normal to you. Because he clearly has a huge blind spot.
This is kind of a really bizarre thing that she's saying here. I'm actually really shocked to hear Crystal say this. But it sounds like that she's kind of advocating for cultural relativism.
Yeah, that's why I made the comment earlier about that.
Because she's saying like, well, Dawkins likes this quote cultural Christianity because he grew up in this set of values and norms, and so obviously since it's what he grew up with, he's gonna like it. And it's like, I mean, that's true, but I would imagine that Crystal would agree that the cultural norms of living in a Western liberal democracy are more favorable to her and to her more morally just than living in, the majority of countries that run under Islamic law, right?
Yeah.
So
favorable to everyone as an individual, for sure.
Right. But I'm saying that she specifically would agree that these Western democracies running under cultural Judeo-Christian values, she would agree is better morally than living under a country kind of going under a cultural Islamic religious law. And it's very weird to me that she's making this argument. I'm very surprised by this argument.
I love that I already brought up the stereotype of the Christian being the homophobic bigot, because she so clearly signals that when she says cultural Christian, whatever that is.
Sure.
Like she knows. She
Right.
knows what it is. She knows what's going on here.
Well, I think what Dawkins should have said, the way I would have phrased this, without getting to like the theological aspects of Christianity versus Islam. I mean, I guess, he's probably far more learned. He's read through the Quran. He talks about it in his books. And so he can make some kind of argument about whether he thinks like the core aspects of Christianity are better than the core aspects of Islam. I don't know enough about Islam to make that distinction. But what I think, the way that I would phrase it and the way that I think most people kind of understand it, because they don't understand those principles, is they understand the outcome. And you could say, like, look, regardless of what you think of Christianity or Judaism, you can look at countries that were majority Christian and had a Christian culture, Christian ethos, have produced all these Western liberal democracies that we all like to live in, right?
Yeah.
That's been the outcome. Even though obviously there are definitely time periods where they were theocracies or monarchies, and there was way too stringent Christian ideology that was kind of run rampant in these countries, right? But the outcome is that that's very considered liberal by today's standards, where for whatever reason, maybe with time, eventually Islam would be become liberalized over time, and maybe so it's not like an ideological constraint, it's just a time constraint. But at the moment, we don't really have Western liberal democracies in mass being produced by societies that follow Islam. And that's really what Richard Dawkins is talking about. And that's what people are intuiting when they kind of make these cultural society-wide comparisons. They're saying, well, let's look at the outcomes. Where all the Western liberal democracies that I would want to live in or be comfortable living in that Islam is producing. And they don't exist.
Yeah, it's not just Christianity, though. It's the Protestant Reformation had a lot to do with this, because you introduce like the Protestant work ethic. You introduce the idea that anyone can understand God, which is easy to jump to. Well, anyone can participate in politics. Mm-hmm. Like there's all these kinds of different memes, to use Dawkins' word, that come out of the Protestant Reformation that just make Western society possible. Yeah. But I don't see that in Islam at all.
Sure, but I would assume, I mean, I don't know what the actual breakdown is, but I'm assuming that in Europe, they're like Catholic majority countries that are still Western liberal democracies, even if that was inspired, or the first people to push for it were like the Protestants. Like
sure.
It's bled over, I'd imagine, into Catholicism.
Sure. I'm not sure, though. I'm not sure that we would be producing, without the Protestant Reformation, I'm not sure that Christianity would be producing Western style democracy.
No, you could be correct in terms of like the origin point of it, right? But it has since bled over.
Yes, of course. Of course.
That's what I'm
saying. The problem is not any particular faith. The problem is extremist in any faith. I think we can look throughout history and see that. I mean, Christianity was used to justify slavery. It was used to justify Jim Crow, right? Do I think those are true and faithful readings of Christianity? No, but I mean, I'm also not a religious believer at all, so I'm not really the person to determine that, right? But even if you look just right now, what's unfolding in Gaza, which I think is particularly...
Okay, well, before she gets into Gaza, I think her point that she just made before she gets to Gaza, I do think that that's true. Like any religion can be very extreme, fundamental, and repressive. As you were saying earlier, people can interpret things in kind of any way, and any religion can, over time or through whatever means, kind of become more moderates or liberal, going forward in the future, and can create, a better society. Probably, I would imagine so, right?
Sure, they can produce different social norms, and then post hoc rationalize those social norms with whatever whatever text they want.
Right. Yeah. Beautifully said. Yes, exactly. And any religion can probably function that way. And then obviously, things would look different because there'd always be flavors, blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying everything would be exactly the same, but the important point that I think Crystal is missing here is not the nature of the thing in terms of the nature of Christianity or Islam. The important point when we're talking about like immigration, or changing demographics, which is what Dawkins seemed to be responding to, was not the potential nature, but what is the current nature? What is the current environment for these things? And the current nature of Islam, the current environment of Islam is far more right-wing socially conservative than he feels comfortable with. It's far more religiously fundamentalist theocratic than he feels comfortable with, and that most people in the liberal Western country feel comfortable with. And that is the attitude that would be, being, dominant in countries as they become more and more Islamic. They wouldn't. So this point that Crystal's making, while it's true on a universal perspective, it's not really relevant to the conversation that people are having now.
Right.
Why there was, heightened sensitivity to the smearing of Islam in this context is you have Muslims who committed a terror attack on October 7th, committed atrocities, no doubt about that. You have a response from a Jewish state and a lot of, led by Jewish extremists who claim to be doing this in the name of, basically their religion, and who have used and perverted and tortured that religious doctrine to justify a genocide. And then if you go back one step further, well, why do we have the creation of the Israeli state to start with? It's because of the Holocaust, and before that, because of pogroms throughout Europe, which were by and large committed by Christians. So to think that any religious faith has a monopoly on truth and justice, or to think that any religious faith has a monopoly on violence and hatred, is just, I think, incredibly ahistorical and inaccurate. So, a lot of...
I mean, that's not what he said. He didn't say, like, Islam has a monopoly on violence.
No. Yeah. I mean, he did say he thought Islam fundamentally, on a core level, has a lot more negative attributes than Christianity. Yeah, right. That's kind of what he was saying. I mean, he didn't say that directly. That's what he was, like, getting at. So.
Sure.
But that's why I said, I think the way you should frame it is that doesn't matter. What matters is the outcomes that these religions have produced in modern times. Because that's really
you got to look at the behavior. You got to look at the cultural behavior that's being produced by this.
Right.
Yeah.
What I saw in my timeline, which is, again, I think, to give us some credit, part of what makes this show interesting is that we, have to expose each other to these different conversations that are happening in different corners of the world and in the internet, was a lot of like, actually, thank you, Richard Dawkins, for confirming what we suspected about your actually ideological worldview based on your previous comments. And by extension, what others who were sort of in this fervent new atheist camp were really about at the time.
See, this is where, look, I guess it's time to piss off some of the Palestinian viewers here. I gotta say, what I think Dawkins is trying to talk about is that if we look at majority Islamic countries, and particularly ones ruled by Islamic theocracy. I mean, look, I've lived under Islamic theocracy in the state of Qatar. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think it's a good way of living. Some of that is rooted in the faith of Islam. Now, do I think that individual Muslims, as Dawkins was saying, are bad? No, absolutely. I don't believe that for any individual person. I do believe that the application of said theocratic law on people is very counter to a lot of the things that we value here in the West. So for example, egalitarianism, equality, the treatment of women. I mean, personally, I'm repulsed by it. Like whenever I'm in the Middle East and I see 4 women shrouded in a burqa walking 10 paces, behind their husband, I think it's disgusting. I know that they have no rights. In India, for example, where my family's from, this has been a huge tension where India has effectively an English common law system, but then you have 200 million or so Muslims who want to, or at least some, want to live with their ability. This was a huge controversy about the ability to divorce their wives by saying that they divorce them as that required in Sharia law. And it comes into major tension because then they're saying that it's discrimination if you don't allow that whenever you're trying to have equal application and protection of the law. So I'm not saying individual Muslims are bad. I would never say that about anybody. I think that extreme interpretations Or I would more put it this way. I would never want to live under Christian theocracy. Got a taste of it growing up in College Station. I definitely wouldn't want to live in Muslim theocracy. Got a taste of that as well. And I, in general, like and respect places like Thailand. I think India to some extent, Japan and others, which have non-Western interpretations and/or worldviews in their governance. That when you combine with English common law and some Judeo-Christian values and influence, you come to more of an equal application and understanding of the law. So that's where I will defend him a little bit.
Okay,
so I think what Sagar is getting at, which I agree with completely, and I think this would be kind of a good way to think about it, is obviously we should never discriminate against individual people. Say, okay, because you're part of this group, we're going to make prejudgments about your behavior and discriminate or be bigoted against you. Okay. I'm not in favor of that. You're not in favor of that, right?
No, totally agree. You shouldn't do that.
Right. But what we should be able to do is say, okay, let's put individuals aside. I'm not going to blame individuals for anything. We should be able to, in these conversations, say, well, let's look at various belief systems, various cultures that exist, and say, okay, this is a good culture. This is a bad culture, right?
Well, we do this all the time when we're arguing over anything like abortion, gay marriage. Right. The argument that people are making is if we change this behavior universally across society, society's going to fall apart, right? That's the big question. So, I mean, these are what we battle. This is what politics is battling over. If we change the way we do healthcare, will society crumble? Right?
Well, yeah, right. It's too much of, I think, the conversation from the left, from Crystal's perspective, it's too wrapped up in the fear of racism, which it's not.
Yeah,
I mean, that's something that you should be afraid of because there definitely are racists out there and we should be vigilant for it. But you can't let the fear of racism make you come up with untrue things or untrue worldview, essentially. Because we do have to be able to say, okay, we, like Crystal and other people on the left can look at, what they think of as Republican or conservative culture, and they'll say that they think that that's immoral and bad, right?
Right.
And they'll say, okay, but that's fine because they're not talking about like in their mind an ethnic group, or they're talking about like white people generally, usually, right?
They are.
Right?
It's white racism, yeah, but
right, it's more acceptable, right? But so by the same token, you should be able to say, okay, well, and the left used to do this in the 90s. The left used to do this pretty, all the freaking time. Would be able to look at the very far right, socially conservative Muslim culture that exists in some of these countries and say, I think that this is an immoral culture. I think this is wrong. I think this is bad. Without making a value judgment on every individual person and say, I'm going to be bigoted if I meet someone who's Muslim and ascribe all these negative values to them. But we do have to be able to say, no, my cultural values are superior in terms of the moral philosophy that I want enacted in my society. And this moral philosophy that this other country is enacting, I think, is morally inferior to mine.
Right. Well, we are super individualistic in our society. So that's our bias. We think, like when Sagar is upset about the women wearing the burqa following behind their husband. I mean, maybe they're having the time of their lives. Maybe they love this. Maybe, they don't want that kind of individual freedom. I'm certain there are people in the society, though, that do want that individual freedom, and that freedom is stifled by the society.
Right.
You have to kind of look at productivity, like how much power does each individual have in the society, and is that something that you desire? Because I do think the Western style hyper individualist society does produce the most like technological innovation, the most diversity of business, the most diversity of culture. Like we're just a cultural powerhouse. And, is that something that you want for your society? I mean, I kind of want it. I think it's cool.
Right.
I think it's cool to think, people are moving mountains to come here. They're to leave wherever they are. We're not moving mountains to go to them, right? We're not trying to move to where the people in the burqas live, right?
Right.
So I think you have to look at those big kind of macro effects when you're judging a culture. And I think you can look at those big macro effects in kind of a scientific way. But you're exactly right. The thing that is standing in the way is just, white liberals being afraid of being called racist. That is the only thing standing in the way,
right,
of them adopting the, Islam are a bunch of homophobic bigots too. It's okay for them to do it with Christianity because Christians are mostly whites.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's just weird. It's weird.
It's funny.
What you're saying is different than what he said, because so secularism, as you're laying out, the ideal of the American model of freedom of religion, and we're not going to have a theocracy, that very clearly to me is the way to go. Because if we were ruled by and we had an actual Christian theocracy with the minority of real Christian fundamentalists in charge, how do they feel about gay people, right? What would that life look like for them? How do they feel about women and women's rights? What would life look like for women here?
A side effect of this model too, this kind of capitalist model that we have, where our religions in the West have to compete for members, is that they really can't get too caustic towards any of their members, right? Because they're literally competing for market share.
You mean caustic towards members of the
members
society?
Members of their own religion, right? Like
you're
saying
they can't be too caustic towards like people that are not part of their religion because they want more people that are in the outgroup to join them, right?
Well, no, I think they can get caustic towards outgroup. I'm meaning towards their own members. Like if someone joins a church and that church all of a sudden is like, we're going burqas for all the women. What's going to happen?
Right, yeah.
What's going to happen to the women, right? They're going to be like, I like the church down the street where I don't have to wear a burqa.
I got you. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, but in these countries where it's kind of like a state mandated religion, it's much more top down. It's not this kind of decentralized power. Yeah.
They can't go across the street
form
to the other, mosque that doesn't make them wear the burqa.
Which, a lot of the people on the right will they don't necessarily like the consumerist kind of aspect of religion, but you got to admit it does make these religions more docile, more.
Well, that's why they don't like it.
Right. Yeah. Because they're authoritarians and they basically want to put their foot down. They want to see everybody in burqas. So, but as someone who doesn't, I'm not really a fan of that. I think the Western system is better. Make these religions compete for members, and let's all be nice to one another. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We can see with, we had a conversation yesterday about ultra-Orthodox Jews within Israel. And, Israel is moving more and more to being this overt, pretty extreme, religious, theocratic government. That's a real divide that is unfolding right now in real time in Israel. I wouldn't want to live under that either. And you're absolutely right. I don't want to live under a Muslim theocracy either. But to, point to this one faith and say, oh, this is the bad one and Christianity is the good one. Like I said, I think if you take even taking religion out of it, if you take any fervently held ideological belief system, someone is going to pervert it to do horrific things. We've seen this throughout history. Sure. But religion...
Trans movement, anyone? Anyone?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone?
Mm-hmm.
Is a particularly potent one. And perhaps my view of this is part of why originally I liked Dawkins and, I liked the way that he laid out these arguments. Religion is so potent because the minute that you see, okay, number one, these people who share my belief, these are the tribe, these are the people who really count and really matter, and God is on our side, the things that can be used to justify are horrifying. And
See, she's really making my argument here about how the West has kind of decentralized the power of religion.
Right.
The thing that she's talking about that she's afraid of, these fervent believers that will do anything, anything the congregation tells them. This decentralized form of religion where we've got Christianity separated up into like 50 different sects really takes a lot of that off the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I assume what her response would be to what you're saying, and to what I've been saying, is that she would argue that these sort of Western liberal things that we like evolved in those cultures and those societies independent and anti-Christian. and have nothing to do with Christianity.
That's just a horrible reading of history.
I agree with you, but I'm saying,
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's the perspective that she's coming from. So she doesn't see, because my response would be like, well, I don't think that's possible. I think any idea that comes out of a society, even if it's a revolutionary idea at the time, it's still going to be stemmed within the ideas and culture of that society. It's impossible to break free of it. And the fact that these Christian societies were able to, en masse, because we're living in it, produce these Western liberal governments and Western liberal societies that we like, that we live in, to me, should be an evidence or indication that it has something to do with the societies that came before it, the cultural attitudes that came before it, which were, generally primarily Christian attitudes.
Yeah, look, all the political theorists are pretty much united on the fact that the Protestant Reformation took a big, what was very influential in forming modern Western democracies, capitalistic style democracies. So, I mean, that's just not really debated in political theory. So,
well, it's a very hyper complicated thing, because we always talk about how very often people, they have an intuition first, an emotion first that leads in a direction, and then they post hoc rationalize it after the fact.
Of course.
And so, even if you go back to the father of liberalism, John Locke, in his second treatise that's so boring and long to read, even he's arguing in favor of liberalism, like almost entirely from
a Christian perspective,
Christian religious perspective, right?
Exactly.
But the question is like, okay, well, is he doing that because like the Christianity inspired him to do that, or is he doing that because he's basically arguing with Christians who are advocating for kings and monarchies and these sorts of hierarchies, and he knows that that's the cultural ethos, so he has to frame his argument in the Christian perspective in like a post hoc way, right?
Sure.
But even then, you could say, well, is it that Christianity, because of the belief structure, and this is what I assume Dawkins would say, he would say that Christianity, because of the belief structures, allow an easier use of kind of post hoc rationalizing these things, these individualism, this democracy that we like, through the Christian ideology, where Islam, for whatever reason, hasn't seemed to accomplish that. Maybe because of the specific beliefs of Islam, it's more difficult to do that.
That is an open question. I don't know enough about Islam to answer it. But the thing that is most salient about the Reformation, I really think, is the point of decentralization, because that is the central idea that Martin Luther took religion, which was a very top-down type institution, and said, listen, you can read the Bible yourself.
Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King.
Right. Did I say Martin Luther King?
I think you did.
No, I said I think I said Martin Luther, but
Martin Luther.
But Martin Luther King Jr. was named after Martin Luther
for good reason.
Yeah. So and they literally call it the Reformation of the church. I mean, it was just and all of the people you're talking about, Locke and all of the founding fathers, they were inside that idea.
Right.
Very much inside that idea that we can form our own nation, right? We can understand things from our own perspective. We don't have to constantly look to the historical past. We can build something brand new. They did look to the historical past to pick and choose the best elements from history to make something completely different, which is just, it's beautiful. Call me when Islam does that.
And, I keep bringing up the example of Israel-Gaza because obviously this is, top of mind for me and many people around the world right now. But just think about, you have these settlers in the West Bank who truly believe that the righteous and holy thing to do is to steal the land of Palestinians, potentially by force, and if necessary, murder them.
See, all she's really talking about here is like the enforcement mechanism of religion, the post hoc rationalization. So
we're talking about the more extreme elements of a religion, right? Which we're kind of talking about like more of a broader view. Could we ever imagine in our modern society that a modern Western liberal society's government would have its army and its citizens intentionally go into another country and say, I want you to go kill, rape, and kidnap as many civilians as you possibly can?
Hell no. Yeah.
Right.
Like insane.
They believe that they are righteously doing God's will when they do. Just listen to that Daniela Weiss, that settler activist.
Sure.
She thinks she is righteous and absolutely moral. Again, no one faith has a monopoly on being twisted and perverted to justify things that in any other sort of moral context, you could see clearly that this is wrong, period, end of story. So, yeah, that's my problem with
Dawkins. I
Dawkins.
think the problem is that what he's really referring to, and this is true if we look at the data, is that most Muslims are far more observant, at least, and also in a Western context when we're talking about the mixing, especially in Europe, than they are, let's say, secular Christians in the West. And so when you have fundamentalist Islam brush up against Western democratic values, it leads to a lot of tension. I totally agree in terms of extremist interpretations of all of that, but it is a legitimate question as to where should this be tolerable and acceptable in a Western-style democracy.
Even that I want to dig into a little bit, because why is it that you have such, fervently held beliefs? Because part of that story is U.S. meddling in the region, that you went against any sort of, secular nationalism.
See, she keeps defaulting back to the fervently held beliefs. But I mean, that argument only works if the fervently held beliefs are something you disagree with. I mean, I think we want people to have fervently held beliefs, like, that men are equal to women and women are equal to men. Like, there are all these kinds of beliefs that really society depends on being fervently held. Innocent until proven guilty. Like, do we want that to just be, whatever? Mm-hmm. Free speech? Shouldn't we fervently hold that free speech is important?
Yes, we should.
Yeah.
And she's making the argument now here, which I admit makes my eyes want to just roll intuitively, even though there's some truth to it, which is that this is America's fault. This is West's bad fault.
Yeah,
because
totally.
The West came in and it helped prop up religious governments, and it helped try to attack, these secular movements in the Middle East, which is that's true-ish. I don't know how widespread it is, enough to make a claim, a general broad claim about why, there's so a lot stronger religious beliefs in the Middle East today. I don't know if you can make that claim. The thing is that she's kind of leaving out here, though, and I think it's important, is that these secular movements in the Middle East, in these specific countries that the West was attempting to undermine, they were not Western liberal democratic beliefs, and it would make literally no sense for the West to try to undermine Western liberal democratic beliefs. They were socialist beliefs. Okay, so you had one ideological extreme, which was fundamentalist Islam, versus another ideological extreme, socialism, that was a big problem that that America was dealing with, West was dealing with in the 50s through the early 90s, and so that wouldn't I don't think we'd be in a better situation if the Middle East was all revolutionary socialist, in the year 2024, right? I don't think we'd be in a necessarily a better spot.
I mean, we're doing great with China, right? Not.
Yeah, exactly. right. Or if you look at, if you look at all the horrors and death that China and the USSR has basically enacted on its own people and the rest of the world, since going socialist, I'm not sure. I don't know. The Middle East track record could be even worse. I mean, I know it's pretty bad still, but it could be even worse under social. I don't know what that would look like. So,
yeah.
Any sort of tie into the Soviet Union or communism or socialism, we crushed.
Wait, let me go back because I think she's talking about what I just said.
That you have such, fervently held beliefs, because part of that story is U.S. meddling in the region, that you went against any sort of, secular nationalism that had any sort of tie into the Soviet Union or communism or socialism. We crushed. I mean, how many?
Okay, so she does bring it up, but I mean, that's good, but you have to address that having that isn't a better alternative. I mean, maybe she thinks it is. I don't think it's a better alternative. So
fundamentalist Islamic movements did we back and side with throughout the region?
That's
of course. Think about how we prop up the Saudi regime. I mean, so much of what is unfolding in the Middle East right now is a result of, our meddling and our policy over years and years and years. So I think to, remove us from the situation, that's where this gets to me, and I'm not putting this on you, but, I listen to comments from Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and others. It gets to this place of basically insinuating, if not outright saying, well, these people are just barbarians. They're just uncivilized. That's part of the justification that's being used right now to justify this genocide of Palestinians that's unfolding in Gaza. Netanyahu saying we are the children of the light and they are the children of the darkness. This is a war for civilization, etc. It ends up resulting in this argument that they are just inherently inferior, barbaric people. And I think that is absolutely repulsive bullshit.
I don't support that, but I don't think it's America's fault that Saudi Arabians cut people's head off in the street. I mean, that's their regime. That's not if anything, actually, it's their own people that want something like that. I don't want to live there, and I definitely don't want any of that that's over here.
So based and true. Thank you, Sagar. And even, I bring up all the time on stream the whole, people point to the Afghanistan thing, which when I looked into wasn't even true, because it was really America was trying to get a moderate force of people, essentially a moderate government formed, after, when the USSR was invading Afghanistan, and it was really Pakistan that betrayed America and Israel, actually, and kind of just making sure that it was the Taliban or what became the Taliban to take power. And for some reason, when people talk about this, they kind of leave that element out of the conversation. But I think, and I understand this, the left is very sensitive to racism, and I get it. And there definitely are racists in the world, but I think the way to think about it correctly would be like if a white, liberal, European, family adopted some kid, from the Middle East, right? I don't think they're going to grow up and be like, in my blood, I have the jihadi. I'm going to suicide, right? Like, no, they're going to be, they're going to completely be within the society of their parents, right? And they're going to assimilate and all that stuff. Like, it's not like it's some genetic thing whatsoever within like the people. I don't believe that people have some genetic cultural disposition towards their religion. I don't believe in Avola's nonsense about these people having the spirit of their culture embedded in their soul or whatever this mystic hoo-ha garbage is. It is a cultural, social aspect. But as people on the left, I argue for and acknowledge, the cultural, social aspect is very, very powerful. And if you have a negative, toxic cultural, social environment, it's going to create a group of people that are doing things you don't like.
Yeah.
And you have to address that, acknowledge that.
True.
And look, it's not America's fault that Muslims in India have, for example, have become way more observant basically as you've had Hindu nationalism on the rise. These are natural, inherent tensions when they run up against each other for frankly, it's just a battle of values. It's like, what do we actually want? Should we have equal application of the law? Should we not? It's like, should we allow people to marry 3 people because their religion says so? I think no, but they say yes. I mean, it's one of those where I don't think that's on America. Like, and if you look,
why does Saudi have the regime they have?
Okay, but it's not
why
just
does Iran have the regime they have? Why does the Taliban have power in Afghanistan? We have nothing to do with any of that. We've just allowed free and fair elections and self-determination throughout the region. Come on,
if they had free and fair elections, I guarantee you Islamists would still win in the entire. And by the way, I don't care if they want to be Muslim and they want to rule under theocratic rule. Be my guest. I'm talking about how we govern ourselves.
It's not like any of these places that we were involved in. If America or some Western country was involved with it, the idea that they would have just naturally become liberal Western democracies is ludicrous. There's literally no trajectory for those countries to go down. If they would, that would have been, and this is why this argument is kind of so silly. If the Western countries could have got the Middle East to be Western liberal democracies, they would have. That's what they want.
Yep.
Like there's like this weird idea in the left that makes that they don't really understand global politics when they talk about this, where they say, okay, they think that these Western countries like America and a lot of European countries will intentionally go into a country that's like going to be a thriving liberal democracy, and they'll destroy it and make it an authoritarian dictatorship so that they can get like cheap labor or extract resources from it, right? This is kind of like the
Right.
socialist leftist worldview. That is so not true. It's completely not true. One of the number one rules, which governments broadly engage in a macro level, is that they want the countries around them and that they have to interact with to be the exact same or similar type of government system that they have, because it always makes relations so much easier with that country when they have the same philosophical principles. When you look at history and when you look at what's going on right now, all the big conflicts are when you have governments and countries that have very different political philosophies that they're rooted in coming to blows and not being able to agree on how to deal with each other, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when you have like Western liberal countries interacting with each other, are they blowing each other up? Are they going to war with each other? No, they're arguing about trade or economics or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we want more customers. We want more people that we can work with. And so if this option was available in the Middle East or South America, which I always like to point to, if the option of being the Western liberal democracy, capitalist democracy, was available, that's the direction that we want. It's the direction that we were trying to push for. But instead, it was like, no, it was socialism. Socialism was being pushed in all these environments.
Yeah, the idea that America stifled the Renaissance, this global Renaissance that's just waiting to happen.
Right.
It's laughable. It's totally laughable.
Here, I don't give a shit what they do over there at the end of the day. But really what it is that what I think Dawkins is talking about and what is a fair conversation is about here, what we tolerate, what we think is acceptable. And I would stand what Dawkins is trying to say for a Judeo-Christian influence, English common law, egalitarianism, which is what I believe in. That is absolutely counter to Christian theocracy. Luckily, that is mostly on the decline here in this country. Luckily, we don't have, the same Jewish level, I guess, here in the US in terms of Orthodox Judaism that's taking over the entire culture. But that is not necessarily the case of majority Muslim countries that are all across the world. Indonesia, for example, Malaysia, any of these places, there's high levels of diversity in others, but there are what I think are troubling ways that they do. He's right. In which they treat women, or in terms of how they've different views of homosexuality or any of this. I think it's abhorrent and I think it's bad.
So do I.
And I don't think we should have it here.
It doesn't just come from Islam. If you look at what evangelical fundamentalist Christians believe, it would not be good life for gay people to live under that sort of regime, which is why.
Dude, I just so nailed it. Did I not just so nail it? I did.
You did.
Yeah, totally nailed it.
You did, yeah.
I can just see inside the brains.
But that's why Dawkins should have phrased it the way I phrased it, we talk about the outcomes that these cultures have produced currently, as opposed to making some comment that either is or could be interpreted as like the intrinsic quality of the nature of the philosophy of religion itself.
Right, yeah. Well, when Dawkins is having this conversation, when I'm having this conversation, I'm accepting that there are good aspects of Christianity that we should accept.
Of course.
Of course there are bad. Look, I'm not in favor of homophobia. I'm not in favor of those aspects of Christianity.
Right.
Look, I would downplay those if I could. Sometimes you got to take, you got to take it as it comes, right? The good and the bad. So.
To me, you're wanting to give Dawkins the most charitable interpretation. And that's fair.
Because I like him.
That's fine. That's fair, to give him the best faith reading. But you're also reading into his comments a lot of things that he didn't say, because he didn't talk about, a secularism and a universalism. He didn't talk about common law or any of these things.
Well, I'm just drawing
He's
from
just
his
saying,
books.
he said very blatantly that, new mosques are a problem, but new churches aren't. He said that Christianity is a fundamentally decent religion and Islam is not. I think that is total bullshit. I think it's xenophobic. I think it's Islamophobic. I think that it is, completely at odds with the ideas that you're promoting, that the best thing is to have actual universal.
I just don't get it. Like, how can you say that? Like, there is as much or more homophobia in Islam as there is in Christianity.
It's because what I said, she's viewing all the things that she likes about Western liberal society, the not being homophobic, the capacity, the individual rights in terms of the capacity that she likes, all these things. She's viewing these as the antithesis of Christianity. So she views, I would guess, this is if you asked her, she would say that all these things developed in opposition to Christianity. So does it make sense to attribute them to Christianity the way that Dawkins did?
Look, just take that off the table. Take that argument away.
But that's what she's operating from. So
right,
I'm assuming
I get it. Look, I think she's incorrect, but let's just say she is correct for the sake of argument.
Sure.
All that still applies to Islam. Why is she simping so hard for Islam?
Well, because what she would say, my guess would be, she'd say that she's not simping for Islam. She just doesn't like the idea, the bigoted idea, because the left is very sensitive to bigotry, that Dawkins is saying there's some quality, some intrinsic quality to Islam that is bad and some intrinsic quality to Christianity is good, when she, number one, thinks A, that's bigoted. Number two, probably thinks that the intrinsic quality that's bad in Islam is also the same intrinsic quality that's bad in Christianity. Right. So that's another area that maybe is not just bigotry, but also that maybe she'd be afraid that this would allow the conservative Christians that want all these things, these bad things that the very Islamic people want, to also kind of run free in the country.
Look, she should just come out and say, my position is they shouldn't build churches or mosques. But somehow I don't think she can say that we shouldn't build mosques because then you're a bigot.
Well, that would be, you're correct. That would be interesting. If she just said, I'm against it, like the religion completely and people practicing the religion completely. Sure,
that's the contradiction here that's just so glaring. Right. It's huge. There's a giant laser pointer on it. I'm going, what? Can't we all see this?
Universal values, not this sort of like moral equivalence.
Well, let me go back
universal
1 second.
With the ideas, really, that you're promoting, that the best thing is to have actual universal values, not this sort of like moral equivalence, universal values, and secularism, where yes, people's religions are respected and they have a right and freedom to religion, but also within the confines of respecting and acknowledging basic human rights. And as I said before, any religion taken to an extreme place, yes, ends in ugliness, can end in ugliness, can be easily perverted. And, to give any one of these faiths a pass for that, I just think it's wrong.
I think the important thing, again, is, Dawkins is answering a question in terms of demographics and immigration. And so is it possible that in the future, Islamic countries would go through some reformation process that Christianity has gone through, that has made it so that the religions can be compatible with creating Western liberal societies focused on individual rights? Probably, right?
Yeah, look.
Probably
talked about this.
Yeah, sure. But we're not there yet at all, really, in terms of the issues. And so when you are talking about immigration, you are talking about demographic change, I do think it is concerning, because it wouldn't be concerning if, I don't know if this is true, but this is the sense we get. The sense we get is that in the 50s and in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, that there was a very strong cultural attitude in like America, at least, of you come to America, you're an immigrant, you come to America and you are going to assimilate.
Yeah.
I think even, actor Just Warrior Sean was talking about this the other day. And I know people, myself, who have told me the same thing, who their family came to America and they didn't even teach their children their native tongue. They only taught them English. Okay. This was how strong the allure and love and respect for America and American culture was. It was saying, we've left wherever we're coming from because we don't like it anymore. It sucks. We're coming to America. You're going to be American. You're going to speak English. Okay. Like your identity is American, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's kind of like the beautiful American attitude, because obviously we're the best. But if that attitude still existed today in America, and that attitude existed in all the various European countries, only for assimilating to British culture, French culture, whatever it is, then I don't think we'd have a problem, right? Because it's like, okay, then you can, who cares if people are immigrating from these other countries that have cultures that, maybe we don't like or are not the best from our perspective, as long as there's this very strong attitude of like, you're assimilating to this country's culture, right? But the problem is the left has weakened that so much that's not the case. There's this very huggy-dovey cultural relativism attitude, multicultural relativist attitude about like, no, you shouldn't assimilate. You should all just maintain whatever the culture is from wherever you came from, which maybe you shouldn't. Maybe where you came from sucked, and that's why you left it.
Yeah.
I'm drawing from is just his look. Nobody can express himself properly in a 2.5-minute clip from LBC. I'm drawing from his books, what he has put out there in longer interpretations. In general, if you are going to see atheists and others, people who talk and debate some of these subjects, they're going to bring up a lot of what I am. Now, I mean, a lot of Christians would be very upset. What they would say is that you owe egalitarianism, to Judeo-Christianity. And I would say that's bullshit. You can look at countries like India or Japan or Korea, anywhere else that don't have majority Christian populations. Thailand actually is a country that I truly love. Deeply Buddhist culture, lots of egalitarianism, no Christian influence. So I can give the counter too. I'm only bringing in what I think he is best trying to say, and I'm giving him charity because I also think that he's done a lot of good in this world. So I opened up a lot of people's eyes.
I will steal from Mehdi Hassan's commentary on this, where he said, if you just swap in Judaism for Islam in these comments, imagine the reaction. If he said that Judaism is not a fundamentally decent religion, there would be a massive and correct reaction against those comments because they would correctly be seen, I think, as anti-Semitic. But Islamophobia is much more accepted, frankly, and is much more commonplace worldview in the West, which again is part of how this genocide in Gaza has been justified. And you see it very nakedly, that case made very nakedly in certain instances, certainly from the Netanyahu government, but also from many Americans.
Saying that Islam has a homophobic streak is Islamophobic, but saying Christianity has a homophobic streak, now that's not Christianophobia, right?
Right.
What is the double standard here, Sitch?
Well, if he made the comments he made about Jews, I mean, I do agree there'd be a pretty big backlash against what he said.
Yeah, of course.
I think it still seems a little different because, obviously there's part of the reason there'd be a backlash is because, that's been a long-held conspiracy that the Jews go into societies and infiltrate them from within and do all this bad stuff. That's not really like a stereotype that exists for Muslims that I've ever heard. Even though they obviously have stereotypes of being like, too fundamentally religious and things of that nature. She accepts
the stereotype with Christians though. Like she's been using that stereotype all through this. It's like the stereotype I like is good, but the stereotype I want to fight against, you bad.
Right, because it's a punching up versus punching down kind of view.
Okay.
Probably. But I don't think this has anything to do, the religious aspect doesn't have anything to do with Gaza, really. I think it's really more just that we view Israel as like a Western-style democracy.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you want to argue that it's not, Crystal, that's how people in America tend to view it. And they view Gaza and Hamas as like a radical
terrorist state.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's like, well, what do you do when you have this radical terrorist state that our Western democracy can't have a normal foreign relationships with, right? And I think that's where the attitudes come from.
That's a great point because most people are looking at it through a political lens, and she's looking at it through a religious lens.
Well, she's assuming everyone's looking at it through a religious or racial lens, and I don't think that's what's going on.
I don't think so either. Yeah, that's a great point.
Americans who see things through that lens.
I think it may be true, certainly, that 9/11 and the lasting impacts have colored and have changed. I guess I just don't want to get away from legitimate conversations about rubbing up against Western democratic values and what we think is acceptable or not in our own cultures, because ultimately that's what I care about. I don't really care what these people do in their own time and in their own lands. But I do really care whenever it brushes up here. And I do see often a very permissive nature, unfortunately, but I think by elements of the American left, when they don't really grapple with some of the actual tenets of, let's say, of widespread, deeply fundamentalist Islamic values, especially when we're talking about immigration, which is why I guess I'm standing for Dawkins in this entire purpose, is I believe very much in being able to scrutinize and to debate what is acceptable in U.S. specifically in the US and also in the West, what we want and what we don't want to encourage and what we think should be acceptable or not, as opposed to, let's say, trying to litigate how people should be treated in Afghanistan. That's Afghanistan's problem. Does that make sense in terms of what I'm saying?
It would be Afghanistan's problem if we hadn't.
Okay, well, we're not there now. Now they can do whatever they want. And apparently,
yeah, but to pretend like, okay, no harm, no foul, you're good to go, and we had no impact there is, you know, that's preposterous.
Taliban rose to power in the 90s too. They were a popular government. Let's be honest, and nobody wants to admit this. It's not.
You know, there's an interesting thing, and I'd be curious the Crystal's response to this. It's like, okay, so you say America was like involved in Afghanistan, and so from Crystal's perspective, that's what created the Taliban in the first place, even though that's not really the case. It was really USSR and Pakistan kind of that created the Taliban. But even if it was true that America created the Taliban, it's like, well, America did try to fix that through the Afghanistan war and was completely unable to. So what is the solution, right? If us pulling out is not good enough because, you know, we created a problem in the first place, but then us going in to try to fix the problem also doesn't work and makes it worse. What's the solution here? Is there, like, what do we do?
It's just basically blame America for everything.
Right.
Not just America's fault. They liked it. In many cases, the Taliban was enforcing their own beliefs, at least in some of these regions. I mean, at a certain point, what are we supposed to do about that?
Listen, I don't want to relitigate the entire history of U.S. involvement in the Middle East, but I think suffice it to say that, you know, we certainly played a significant role in creating some of the backlash and in actively supporting some of these extremist movements that have come to power in various parts of the region. So in any
case,
but
they elect their own, Crystal.
But
I remember Muslim Brotherhood getting elected there in Egypt.
Let's acknowledge that the ideal situation that I think we, and I wish Professor Dawkins there was speaking to, was secularism, universal human rights, and values of the type that we see being trampled right now, certainly, with Muslims in the Middle East.
You know, I'm going to reach out to him. I want to talk to him.
Hey guys, if you like that video.
Dawkins is saying Christianity gets you closer to secular values than Islam. That's basically what he's saying. So,
I mean, that's how I interpret that's what he's saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'm assuming that's what he would say if you, as Sagar said, it's a very short clip, right? You know, if you had an hour-long conversation with him to like really go into all his, you know, ideas, I'm assuming he would kind of go down that track. So,
yeah. So any final thoughts?
No, I just thought it's, you know, a very interesting video. I know I thought you would like it because you talk about cultural Christianity all the time too, and it seemed like it's interesting that Dawkins is kind of on that track, or maybe has been, and we didn't realize it this whole time.
Yeah, look, I always talk about the meme of forgiveness, and I think there's a lot of scientific research that has been done that kind of says you got to get that going in society. That's a good thing to have. So,
well. And it's fascinating too, because, you know, this kind of in like the Nietzschean perspective, Christianity is like the quote slave religion.
Yeah.
And so it's weird. It's interesting how, like, I can understand the logic looking backwards now, post hoc, why the slave religion, the religion that kind of criticizes strength and lionizes, or, you know, holds up, you know, quote, meekness or peace is going to create Western liberal societies. I don't know if that meme exists in Islam. You know, I don't have personal knowledge of it. I've heard from other accounts, I don't know if it's true, that Islam is like that more of like a conquering religion. You know, it's more aggressive religion, so it'd be more difficult for that idea to progress. Now, I would be interested, and I don't know the answer to this question, how did Judaism exactly progress along the lines to being Western liberal values? Or was it forced to just because Jews have always been a minority living in Christian areas? Because obviously the Old Testament doesn't really necessarily, you know, it wasn't a slave religion. It doesn't necessarily, it was, you know, kind of a more violently aggressive religion. It doesn't necessarily promote like those kind of like Western liberal values. So,
well, Nietzsche did say that Islam or not Islam, but Judaism and Christianity both kind of lionized meekness as well.
He says, I think he said Judaism became to lionize weakness because of the fact that Jews were always a minority.
Right.
But that philosophically, it wasn't that way. At least like if you just go to like Old Testament texts and everything.
Right. This is what we're saying about it's really a matter of the cultural behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So maybe it was just the Jews being in those situations is what changed the cultural attitudes. So
Right. And they didn't need any text to post hoc rationalize it because that's just the way it is.
Yeah, right. They lived it. Right. Sure.
All right. This was great. I guess we'll leave it there. Thanks.
Take care.
Hi. You just listened to a Sitch and Adam recorded video. That's right. We're still doing recorded videos. And we're even doing shorter daily live streams now beginning at 2 p.m. Eastern, where we cover the top news stories of the day. Check it out. And you can super chat us, or you can join the channel. Subscribe to this channel right here to watch the live show or watch more of our awesome deep dive videos.